Billionaire woman wakes after crash. Her Black EMT claims they're married. She falls again. The sound of machines humming softly echoed through the white hospital room as the woman's eyelids fluttered open. Her body felt heavy, every muscle aching as if she had been fighting for her life. The bright lights above stung her eyes, and when she tried to sit up, a sharp pain struck her chest, forcing her back against the pillow. She could hear distant voices, hurried footsteps, and the faint smell of disinfectant mixed with metal. Everything around her felt strange, disconnected, like waking from a dream she couldn't quite remember. A nurse standing nearby froze for a second before rushing out to call someone. The woman's heart raced, her breath shallow. She had no idea where she was or what had happened to her. Moments later, the door creaked open and a tall black EMT entered the room. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, his hands still carrying the faint marks of work. A man who had seen pain but still carried kindness in his eyes. The instant he saw her awake, his expression shifted from exhaustion to relief. "Thank God," he whispered, his voice trembling as if he had been holding those words in for days. He stepped closer to her bedside, hesitant yet drawn to her like a force he couldn't resist. She looked at him confused. His face was unfamiliar, yet something about his presence stirred a feeling deep inside her, a flicker of warmth she couldn't explain. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice weak and uncertain. The man swallowed hard before answering, eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. "I'm your husband." The words struck her like thunder. Her heart began to pound as her mind spun in disbelief. Husband? That couldn't be true. She was sure she had never seen him before in her life. Her throat tightened and fear crept into her chest. She tried to remember anything. A wedding, a ring, a face, but there was only emptiness. Still, there was something in his voice that didn't sound like a lie. It carried pain, love, and hope all at once. The silence between them stretched painfully long. The woman studied his face, the tired eyes, the trembling hands, the way his lips quivered when he looked at her. It wasn't the face of a stranger trying to deceive her. It was the face of someone who had been through sleepless nights praying for her to live. She turned her head away, confusion clouding her thoughts. "I don't remember you," she murmured. The man's jaw tightened, but he nodded gently. "That's okay," he said softly. "You will." His tone wasn't demanding. It was a promise, one filled with patience and quiet strength. As the nurse entered again and adjusted the monitors, the woman lay there watching him leave the room. Part of her wanted to call him back, to ask more, to understand what connection they shared. But another part of her was terrified of what she might learn. She closed her eyes, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway, and whispered to herself, "Who am I really?" Somewhere deep inside, a faint echo of memory stirred, and it whispered his name. Days turned into weeks, yet her memory stayed lost in shadows. Every morning began with the same confusion, the same hollow feeling of not knowing who she truly was. The doctors explained that the crash had caused partial amnesia, that pieces of her past were buried deep within her mind, waiting for time or emotion to unlock them. But the waiting was torture. Each face that entered the room was a stranger. Each photograph shown to her felt like someone else's story. Still, there was one person who refused to give up on her, the Black EMT who claimed to be her husband. He visited her every day, always calm, always gentle, as if afraid his voice might break her fragile state. He brought her flowers from the hospital garden, told stories of their laughter, and sometimes sat silently by her bedside, holding her hand as though that single touch could remind her of everything she had forgotten. One afternoon, he placed an old photo album on her lap. Inside were pictures of them together, smiling, holding each other, standing by the ocean as the sun set behind them. She traced the edges of those photographs with trembling fingers. The woman in them looked like her, yet her heart didn't recognize that happiness. "These can't be real," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. He didn't argue. He simply said, "You told me once that love doesn't need proof, just faith." His words struck something deep inside her, a spark of emotion that confused and comforted her all at once. Her old life felt like a dream she had just woken from. Luxury cars, Endless meetings, flashing cameras, and a mansion too large to ever feel like home. She was a billionaire used to commanding rooms, not someone who hid away love in the shadows. Yet, when he spoke, she felt warmth in her chest. The way he adjusted her blanket, the way his hand brushed against hers, the way his voice softened when saying her name. It all felt familiar, as if she had lived those moments 1,000 times before. One rainy night, she sat awake while the storm rattled the windows. He was there again, sitting quietly in the chair beside her, half asleep but unwilling to leave. She turned her head toward him and asked the question that had been haunting her since the day she woke up. If we were really married, why didn't anyone else come? Why am I so alone? His eyes opened slowly, his expression heavy with sadness. He hesitated before speaking, his voice quiet but honest. Because you wanted to protect me from your world. You said they wouldn't understand, that love like ours would be destroyed by power and greed. Her breath caught as a faint image flashed in her mind. 2 hands intertwined in secret, a promise whispered in the dark, a kiss under pouring rain. It wasn't clear, but it was real. For the first time since the crash, she didn't feel lost. Somewhere beneath the fog of forgotten memories, her heart had begun to remember him. The morning sun spilled softly through the clouds as he wheeled her into the hospital garden, the scent of fresh flowers mixing with the crisp breeze. It was her first time outside since the crash, and every color seemed brighter, every sound sharper. The man beside her moved slowly, matching her fragile pace. There was something about his presence, steady, warm, and patient, that made her heart beat faster even though her mind still struggled to remember. They sat beneath an old oak tree, silence hanging between them until he finally spoke. His voice was low and gentle, carrying the weight of truths long buried. He told her everything, how they met years ago when his ambulance had rushed to her aid after a small car accident. She had been shaken but unharmed, and while most patients forgot their rescuers, she didn't. She had returned days later to thank him in person, her eyes filled with gratitude and curiosity. That single meeting had changed both their lives. He described how their paths kept crossing, sometimes by chance, sometimes by choice. She was a woman of influence, powerful, admired, and always surrounded by people who wanted something from her. But with him, she could breathe. He saw her not as the billionaire businesswoman the world worshipped, but as a person who still laughed at simple jokes, who dreamed of sunsets instead of contracts. Their friendship had quietly grown into something deeper, something neither of them could stop. We knew it was wrong in their eyes, he said softly, looking at her with tears forming in his eyes. But it felt so right to us. She listened, her heart trembling at the emotion in his words. He told her how they had married in secret, in a small chapel with no witnesses except the rain tapping against the glass. They had promised to protect each other, no matter what the world said. But the world hadn't stayed silent. Her family had found out, furious that she had tied herself to a man they saw as beneath her. They threatened to destroy him, to erase him from her life. Still, she refused to let go, until the night of the crash changed everything. When he spoke of that night, his voice cracked. They came to the hospital before I could. They told everyone I was no one, just an EMT who took advantage of your kindness. I stayed quiet because fighting them would only hurt you more. His eyes glistened as he added, I loved you too much to destroy your peace. Her lips trembled as his words sank in. She reached out, her hand brushing his cheek, feeling the warmth of a love she couldn't yet recall but somehow believed in. A single tear slid down her face as she whispered almost to herself, Why do I feel like I've known you forever? He smiled through the pain, and in that moment her heart remembered what her mind could not, the love they had fought to protect. The night was calm, with soft rain drizzling over the city, washing the streets clean as though the heavens themselves wanted to give her a new beginning. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk watching droplets fall from the streetlights, her reflection blurring in the puddles below. Every sound, every scent, every flicker of light brought flashes of memories that once lived deep inside her mind. Laughter echoing in a small apartment, the smell of coffee in the morning, his smile across the table, his touch when the world felt too heavy. The pieces of her past were returning like waves, soft but unstoppable. After weeks of confusion, she finally remembered. Not through words or proof, but through feeling. Her heart knew him before her mind did. She hailed a cab, her pulse racing with a mixture of fear and longing. She gave the driver an address that she hadn't consciously remembered, yet her soul did. His home. The journey felt endless. Raindrops streamed down the window like tears she had held back for too long. Her hands trembled as the car stopped in front of a small, modest house at the corner of the quiet street. It was nothing like the grand mansion she once owned, but it radiated warmth, safety, and truth. She stepped out, her hair damp, her heart pounding as she walked to the door. When it opened, he stood there, stunned into silence. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. The woman who had once looked at him with confusion now looked at him with certainty. Her eyes were no longer lost. They were home. "I remember now," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rain. "I remember you." Her words hit him like sunlight after a storm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, holding her as though afraid she would disappear again. The rain soaked through their clothes, but they didn't care. It was as if the storm outside was blessing their reunion, washing away the pain, the lies, and the lost time. She looked up at him through tears, smiling through the ache in her chest. "I fell once and lost everything," she said softly, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "But this time I'm falling again, and I know who will catch me." He pressed his forehead against hers, his voice trembling with emotion as he whispered, "I've been waiting to catch you since the day you fell." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, as thunder rolled faintly in the distance. For the first time since the crash, she didn't feel broken or incomplete. She felt whole. The woman who had once been a billionaire defined by power and possessions had found something far greater. Love that couldn't be bought, lost, or erased. Under the gentle rhythm of the falling rain, she knew her life had restarted, not from memory, but from the heart that had finally remembered where it belonged.